Thank you very much, Chairperson, and to the Minister and to the Department for the presentation and for the spirited contributions from Honorable Subrati and other members of the committee. My concern is that it seems like the Minister is trying to amend legislation using a ministerial policy directive. And I'll tell you why. Because you use the word alignment, and I think you do it deliberately instead of amendment. So I think you're trying to effect amendments using a ministerial policy directive to the Electronic Communications Act as well as to the ICT Sector Code, which is a product of the BBBE Act. Because in your policy directive communication, you say that you seek to align the two. I'm interested as to what would the consequence of that alignment look like? How do you achieve alignment outside of changing legislation? Because the ICT Sector Code, as much as it might be a regulatory instrument under the Department of Communications, it's a product of the BBBE Act. And to give a ministerial directive on the ICT Sector Code, which belongs to that specific act, which is regulated by the Department of Trade and Industry, confuses me. On the Electronic Communications Act, which speaks to the 30% ownership as well, I would imagine that an amendment of that or an alignment of that with the ICT Sector Code would require some level of amendment to either both pieces of legislation or one. One doesn't belong to the Department of Communications. It's a product of an act of the Department of Trade and Industry. The other is an act of Parliament. When you want to achieve this alignment, how do you seek to achieve it using a ministerial policy directive? And I think that speaks to the overstepping of powers or overstepping of executive powers that has been spoken to in the House. That is my primary legislative concern. But also conversely, I mean, we're talking about Starlink here. I don't think we should tiptoe around it. We're talking about Starlink. There might be many other foreign satellite companies that have interest in operating in South Africa, but there's a specific interest in Starlink, and I think Siklo will speak to the political context about that as well. But I'm interested in, has there any been consideration of the impact the introduction of foreign satellite companies operating in South Africa would have on the local telecommunications industry, specifically as it relates to jobs? Because there's a myth going around here that the introduction of Starlink will achieve two things, that it will achieve rural access to increase jobs. How will a satellite that will operate and be ran remotely from another country impact on the local telecommunications sector's jobs? And considering especially the high unemployment rate in this country. But secondly, what is the knowledge of the department on the costs related to the introduction of foreign satellite operators? Will it necessarily bring higher connectivity levels to rural communities? Will it be cheaper? Comparative to what? And has there been any consideration of the other spheres within which Starlink operates and the regulatory frameworks in the other countries that they operate, and whether they abided by them as set in stone? Because we are aware that they are operating in India with much stricter ownership, regulatory existence in terms of local ownership there. We know there's been a challenge in Taiwan, in Japan. Why are we altering our legislation for Starlink, whereas where it goes to operate in other countries, it did not utilize this coercion for us to change our laws in order for it to operate in South Africa? So I'm interested in the legislative aspect of it, and I think we'll talk further after we get clarity on that. Thank
Chairperson,
you.
I think I've been greatly covered by my fellow colleagues, but one would also want to find out, in terms of the position of the Honorable Minister in his policy directive or recommendation for gazetting, one would want to understand whether it has been taken into consideration not only through his political party, but as a minister, as an official in cabinet, the consequences that this will have on the ordinary South Africans. Ultimately looking at whether it will provide an opportunity for SMMEs who are in the sector to have an opportunity to become service providers in the space. And additionally, it would be what type of consultation has taken place also with the Department of Innovation and Science. We do know that Innovation and Science has a particular program and project that they are running as well. And one would want to see if this was a unilateral decision that was taken, or was there consultation and consultation that is befitting and sufficient to really put a case study forward. Chairperson, also just taking into consideration, and I think this was said by Honorable Sobrathi, in terms of how the minister has conducted himself with the policies and perhaps how he seeks to amend transformative policies. One is quite concerned in terms of whether we are progressing or regressing. And perhaps through your guidance and your leadership, Chairperson, you will guide us in terms of the proximity or the reach of the minister and this portfolio committee in terms of those amendments and perhaps the recommendation. And I think it's quite important for us to re-emphasize that as a portfolio committee and as part of our oversight and our responsibility, we are finding out decisions that are made by the minister on social media and through media platforms. And one would want to have an appreciation that the minister is regularly invited to this platform and to this portfolio committee to take us into confidence on developments of the department. And I think this was said by Honorable Matafa, if I'm correct, to the question to say, or was it yourself, Chairperson, to say, did he sit and then make a decision? Or is this a political party directive and political line of march that is currently being displayed? And we must understand that, as indicated by my colleagues as well, we must take a very clear stance that we're not going to derail from a transformative agenda where we seek to improve the lives of the most vulnerable and create economic opportunities. And I think what is clearly displayed here is leaving an opportunity for international players to come through the back door without consequences, and therefore removing or creating a greater vacuum from those who are in the local market from actually competing. And I think this is what these recommendations that are brought forward by, and I'm going to call them recommendations by the minister, seek to achieve, and more especially favor business rather than look at the interest of South Africans and those who are previously disadvantaged from opportunities. And how do we ensure that these economic opportunities are really deeply rooted in providing or being distributed with the previously disadvantaged in our communities? The last part, Chairperson, I think